Tech Snippets Today with Joseph Raczynski.
All right, Steve Fisher, you are a design futurist entrepreneur, podcaster, and co-author of SuperShifts, Transforming How We Live, Learn, and Work in the Age of Intelligence with co-author Dr. Ja-Naé Duane. Welcome aboard.
Thank you. Thank you
All
for
right.
having me.
I'm really looking forward to this. Okay, let me create a quick synopsis of the book. You're going to tell me where I go astray on this. But in Super Shifts, you both give an overview of how we are at the end of a 200-year arc, embarking on yet another one that's about to come. With this new age of intelligence, you both are highlighting the various catalysts for change currently affecting individuals, businesses, and society as a whole. You're also providing a model for transformation that expertly bridges the gap between theory and practice to provide a holistic view of making radical change through three different lenses. I love this. You as a leader, you as your organization, as well as society. And the book pays particular attention to how emerging technologies, biological revolutions, and energy abundance create opportunities for humanity and its transformation. It also focuses on the emergence of new intelligent species, which is the most fascinating thing to me over the
Yeah,
next 200 years. There's a lot there. Now,
a lot.
well, before we even get into that, real quickly, what is a design futurist and what is your focus in this book on that?
Yeah, so as a design futurist, there are many different kinds of futurists. And I think, one of the things that I've always said is that most people find this field by accident. I read Alvin Toffler when I was 13 in the 80s, and I was like, wow, that's a job. You can actually do that. But I took a more traditional path with business and technology and such the like. But I worked in a lot of futures work for the last 25 years, and I've been practicing as a futurist. I helped build the futures practice at McKinsey a couple of years ago, and
Fantastic.
did that at FTI as well. But I'm kind of, we're out here doing this full time, and what it is. There's people come at this from different fields. There are economics, finance. There are artists, philosophers. There's a lot of different social theorists. There's a lot of different people that bring such a diversity to the voices of this field. As a design futurist, what we do is communicate the future through various forms of design. What does that mean? Well, that means looking at speculative prototyping or design fiction. Design fiction, you could relate to just science fiction itself is design fiction because you're world building, you're creating scenarios of the future and the people that inhabit that. And that's a big part of I think the real interesting part of the book, there's many interesting parts, but I think is a real differentiator is that there's a design fiction piece about the Sinclair family. In the prologue, we meet them. It's the years 2040. There's a lot that's obviously happened in the world, but we talk about the singularity. So is it kind of like what happens after? They experience an AI anomaly, a lot of things that they're also working on in their life. So we witness it through their eyes and this kind of perilous beginning. But we talk and introduce the audience to the age of intelligence and a few other concepts before we get back to the super shifts. The super shifts themselves, each chapter of the super shifts give the reader a kind of lens into experiencing that through the Sinclairs, and then we wrap that up 200 years at the next age of them still being alive. And I think that's one of the most interesting things about this age of intelligence that we call this. There's a lot of things people have kind of put names to, but when you think of the age of intelligence, it's a very different age this time. We can talk about, macro history because our
Right.
research, we went back 1,000 years in terms of the different ages that go back in time. We're kind of coming out of this age of machines. Our age of engines, everything kind of factories, industrial revolution, information technology, all these things that change, but still we had a finite life. We have for the first time, I think, the opportunity or the choice to actually be alive for the entire age. That's why I said the Sinclairs, some of them are still there and they embark on that. So I think it's a real exciting part of it. So
It's amazing to start to think about those things. I think a lot of
mhm.
people are so focused in on the next 6 months or year,
Yeah,
2 years at most. Even when you speak to companies in terms of their development, what they're thinking about, I think everything tends to be short term.
Yeah.
And I think we both have gone down this path, and I've been doing like sort of this futuristy talk for the last 10 years.
Mhm.
And one of the things that's always been a struggle is to help people see the potential of what the future may look like or how they can best position themselves, either
Yeah.
their minds and to wrap around these types of things. So why do you think people do struggle with what that future could look like and how to make better long-term decisions?
Um, Sometimes it's the paralysis of the present, I call it, because people are very much stuck in the model of the mental models of the way they live. So the uncertainty of change, some people can't actually mentally handle it. They just can't go there.
Yeah.
I found that interesting. I took a course a long time ago on psychology of futures, and I found it fascinating of the way the brain, because for me, it's natural. Like I'm kind of thinking of the future. That's what I do, right? I help people think about those types of possible futures. But people are just by nature reactionary. They're tribal. Um, and when people are just trying to kind of get by, it's almost like their level to go beyond that is nearly impossible. But what we have to be able to do for them, for people, is give them the comfort that there's the ability to navigate that uncertainty. And I always talk about navigating the future. And we call that in futures work possible futures because it's important to emphasize that futurists don't predict the future. Despite all the emails you get and all the news articles in January about the year ahead,
Right.
that prediction stuff is all fun and kind of corny. It's kind of like, but those are based on trends or existing things that are happening. People are just kind of extrapolating on that. But the reality of futures thinking and really kind of putting that mindset is it's a resiliency method. It's like I want to be able to navigate that uncertainty and having the mindset and the understanding that there are many possible futures. Some can be bad, some can be better, but eventually one will become the present. And if you're able to understand those possible futures, you're able to see clearly where things are going, and it should give you more peace of mind. And that's for us one of the things we look in SuperShifts is that we take these larger macro level types of, I mean, this is systemic change that is disruptive. I mean, we're all feeling that right now, right? And when this is being taped in the United States, there's a lot of economic turmoil and that's just on the short term, right? That's with tariffs. Then you think about artificial intelligence and what it's doing to jobs and the fear, but also there's people who are optimistic. So there's a lot of that uncertainty that people are just experiencing in real time. And I think what's happening too is that the rate of change is also shortening. People feel it more actively now than they did 5 years ago.
Yeah.
They're living in this change. They're recognizing that systems are and institutions are breaking down and there's new ones being formed and you're right in the middle of it. And people feel that and they need that kind of, guide of like, where do we go?
No, I think you said it well. Uh, I've always said it's like our monkey minds are so used to a
Monkey
linear
minds.
path.
I love that.
We're used to a
Love
linear
that.
path, and it
Yeah.
doesn't quite change until you start to see it. And now people are starting to be a little more enlightened to how quickly the cycles are. But yet, I still personally think that we're not at the point where people are seeing that sort of exponential growth, which, to what you just brought up, how will that, and this is where I'm kind of curious in your vision and maybe in the context of the book,
Mhm.
I think one of the things I saw was that AI isn't necessarily taking your job, but it's redefining it. So how does that look like in your view of if someone's, I mean, you could almost take any job and how does
Right.
it look? Could be a project manager, could be a doctor, a lawyer, could be anybody. What does that look like for those individuals that are trying to position themselves for future proofing their work?
Yeah. And I love that you said future proofing. I mean, future proofing is a big part of my communication to people is it again is the resiliency message. Because if you look at the span of large amounts of time, there's actually a term like called macro history, where you're not like looking at like, maybe like World War II or shorter periods, right? You're looking at hundreds of years, thousands of like large periods of change. And when we looked at the age of intelligence, we looked back to the age of machines, with the age of exploration, the age of expansion. These just like the age of there's 200-year ages. Within that, there are four 50-year eras. I call this era that we're in now is the quantum era because I
Okay.
think in terms of the most systemic, it's not just going to be AI. It's going to be like what powers and links to everything. We're just at the beginning. It's almost like the beginning of the integrated circuit from the move from the transistor to the integrated circuit back in the 50s and 60s. It's that kind of Precambrian explosion of like what problems can we solve? What can we do? And if you look at the span of time, back to even the Industrial Revolution, there was the famous Luddite movement. These are people that they did not want machines. They feared for their jobs. This is not a new psychological thing.
Right
It's
on.
it's it's a consistent thing. I mean, I will self-admittedly, I've said this on my show, that I was very anti-AI for a long time. I keep thinking about my father, who I love him, and he just retired as a civil engineer after 50 years. He had a
Wow.
firm for decades, refused to learn CAD, can still use a slide rule to this day. I mean, the
Amazing.
man's brilliant. I mean, he can do math in his head.
Yeah.
Let's just say that works really well when he goes to Atlantic City. Um, but when you, sorry, I digress there. But when you think about the people's ability to kind of accept that, with me with AI, it was like as an artist, I was kind of really mad that they were taking people's art and learning from it, and they were not compensating the people for what they were doing. I see it definitely as when you look at other pieces of technology, it is your creative partner. It can be your sounding board. It can do many things for you if you look at it in the lens of as a tool and how it helps power your work, how it differentiates your ability to do that work in a way that you might not have even been able to think before. Because I've always thought about just an example. I was doing some notes for this show, and I was like asking it things because I built a RAG, which is like a
Yep.
kind of a GPT for the book, and I asking it things like what and the structure and the things that it gives me. I was working on an email campaign, like it would take me 2 or 3 hours to do that. And it gave me what I needed in like 5 or 10 minutes, and I can work from that. But I didn't just take it, right? I think that's where we're looking at this new age is that we're not just in a place where we're dealing with intelligence as, you know, the power of a computer. We're looking at, humans were the form of intelligence on this planet for millennia. Now we have something where we're actually having two types of intelligence. We're having intelligence from machines.
Yep.
I think that is, I mean, we could get into, how
Yeah.
many books, I mean, talk about that kind of work. But it is going back to that is that people shouldn't fear it. It is hard to retrain it, but I think people need to have a perspective on what is it going to do to their profession. I mean, I could talk about what I've dealt with in design, for probably for an hour, but I think
No,
it's
no,
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
sure. I mean, there's so many different topics here I'd love to sort of touch upon. First,
sure.
really quick tangent, because I'm kind of curious to get your vision on this. And it's
Mhm.
really much more of a practical thing before we maybe jump into a new species being created
Mhm.
after all of this. And that is copyright. So you have all
Yes.
of these models that are some are using copyrighted materials, some are not. And you have maybe some Chinese models that are definitely using copyrighted materials. What's your take? What's your thought on this as things move forward or progress? Do you think it's something that should be available to these models to train off of?
Um, I do, I do, and yeah, that's such the consultant answer. I do, and I depends. I do, and I don't. I was kind of, I found like there was this one large database of terms of learning, and you could search on things, and they took our book, the Startup Equation, our first book, and used it in there.
Wow.
I never it was copyrighted. I mean, I've had to deal with like there's a startup equation Kindle thing people use with their title, and I can't get it removed, and our
Oh no.
publisher wouldn't do. Oh yeah, so like the way, but you think about that's like a deliberate. it's one thing to like use the title or you take the text, but this other one learned from it. But I'd be happy to contribute. It's 10 years old, but you just got to ask. I think it's the ask. It's
Yeah.
kind of like opting into like getting telemarketing calls or opting out, right? Or email newsletters. I'm very sensitive about sending emails to lots of people because I know how much I get. But I think that we we need to learn from the body of knowledge that is out there that makes us better. I think there needs to be more rigorous use of sourcing. I think if you're writing something, you have to ask in the GPTs to source it for you. But sometimes it needs to be more natural. Yeah,
Yeah.
I have I think one of the opportunities for entrepreneurs out there is to figure out a compensation model. I'll give you a good example is 11 Labs. They do
Yeah.
voice cloning or
Yep.
voiceover work. I've cloned my voice. It's helped me just in concept stuff doing it's great. I love it. Well, there's a lot of professional voiceover artists that make a lot of money for doing things, especially like audiobooks, right? And film. They do it's you can't replicate that person until now, but they can replicate themselves, which is beautiful. They can replicate themselves and basically put themselves on the market. So I can use that voice and they get compensated just like Google. If you're a premium member and you get instead of ads, you get compensated by Google. It's the same thing. So you can monetize your voice while you sleep out
Yeah.
of your own choice. I think that's awesome. I
I
think
totally
really
agree.
good. So
Yeah.
like if you're an artist, like what really angered me about Midjourney, and I use it a lot, but some artists like Frank Miller or Alex Ross or just artists I admire, you can literally type their names in there and it'll give you the style. But
Yeah.
they never gave permission, right? They never put it in there. If they wanted to put their body of work in, great. And then you can emulate that and they can get compensated. Great. I think there's real entrepreneurial opportunities to figure out how to monetize this in a way that I think we're just trying to catch up and get the data, but I think there's real business opportunities for people.
Yeah, and I think there definitely are. There's probably two paths that I sort of have conceptualized. I don't know if they're going to work or
Mhm.
not, but
Yeah.
one is tying it back to sort of blockchain. So if you're able to authorize and say that this was actually created by X, Y, and Z, and you have a cryptographic hash of that and stored on the blockchain, you're able to prove that, then potentially revenue when you have agents that are sort of creating these things and building things, whether it's art or other, it could come back to that and use that and then pay that person, compensate the person that way. The other one that's more progressive is this, I think it's CCO. Basically, it means
Mm.
that anybody can use this. It's not copyrighted. It's maybe an image of something. Anybody can use it for whatever they want. But the person that originally owns it or created it, it's the likelihood of that being raised in profile so that if somebody does want to buy that in the future, because you see it and derivatives therein, it will actually buoy its value. And
Oh,
so it's just like it's an interesting concept that some people in the NFT world are playing around with because they're like, oh, do we want to just allow that anybody who wants to use this? And you're like, I don't know. But this is a way of also potentially bringing money back to the person that originally created it. I don't know. It's a thought, but
no, that's another good example. Um, yeah. So you go ahead. You were just
yeah.
gonna.
So I guess a few other things I'm kind of curious about, maybe totally different, unless you want to continue down that path. is is this idea of sort of biohacking and
Mhm.
longevity and all these things that people are starting to think about. And I just read something from MIT that was just like it kind of like messed with my mind a little bit, but there's a group that's now trying to basically clone humans without a brain so that you would have a clone of your own body to harvest maybe your heart or your liver or God knows what, right? Your lungs.
It
And if you
reminds me of the
need
movie The Island with
exactly.
with Ewan McGregor and Scarlett Johansson. They're alive. They're not husks. It's like but yeah, wow, that doesn't surprise. I mean, they just cloned the direwolf. I mean,
Yes.
somebody's really into Game of Thrones. I'm just saying.
To bring those
But I
back.
mean,
Yes.
baby woolly mammoths are next,
They
apparently.
are. They are.
But wow, yeah. So yeah, it's interesting you bring that. That kind of so what's the model? Are they going to, I mean, it seems like it's a wealthy, it's almost like it's like altered carbon. Like, it's like they're like instead of sleeves, you just kind of, put your consciousness into, they're basically like your husk, like the body parts for you.
So
That's
initially, yeah, initially it's just body parts. So if you, God forbid, your heart stops working and you want a transplant, it will be available for you, or whatever else you might need, a new knee, whatever the case is, you can actually do that transplant much easier. It's very difficult to now you're on a list, all these things. So that's the idea that we'd all have that to promote the longevity. But then you could really go further out and say, why don't we just do brain transplants at that rate, right? So which I know they're potentially working on. There are groups that are working on that, but that is further out.
so what we explore in the book is not only with the kind of human machine, you think of the one extreme, and this Gattaca comes to mind as well. So many good films. It reminds me of, the kind of valid invalid type of where people genetically modify it. But in this case, that may be one of them. We call it kind of homo machina. Because so this kind of like the man in the machine, right? The person in the machine. And I'm by no stretch, going, I'm not a biologist, but looking at how it could go, this was kind of the possible futures thing, like how different our species could go. Yeah, you're gonna have your, Homo sapien, right? These are
Right.
the purists, the Luddite. They're not like I'm me. I'm like, I don't know. I might jump into another body, but it's about is it augmentation? Is it connection? Is it replacement? Is it transfer? So I'm gonna read some like I got six of them. So we've got Homo cyberneticus.
Okay.
So that's a human with extensive cybernetic enhancements for interfacing with tech, almost kind of like jacking into the Matrix type of thing,
Right.
right? Or Johnny Mnemonic, right? That
Sure.
kind of thing, right? Um, then there's Homo roboticus. So that's human consciousness in a robotic body. So that's kind of like, you could look at it as like, there was a Bruce Willis movie, I think. It was like they were you're kind of like your robotic person went out into the
I know
world
what you're
because,
talking about. Yes.
yeah, yeah. And then Homo genetica. This is genetically engineered humans with enhanced traits. So this is like Gattaca, right? And then we call them Homo vertalis, which is humans existing primarily on the virtual reality. So you're kind of like really jacked. It's kind of like cyberneticus, but you're really in the virtual world.
Hmm.
That's kind of
Okay.
like and then this is where it gets really wild. This is where the futurist
Not
in
yet.
me, the far
It's
future.
just
Not yet.
getting
We're not
wild
even,
now.
yeah. Now it's like, oh, you're going to get wild now. Homo nexus, which is like a deeply interconnected humans forming a collective. I mean, you could say it's the Borg,
Right.
but I'm not going to go there.
Okay.
But really think about it, right? If you can, they talk about walk a mile in someone's shoes, right? What if you could truly understand the challenges somebody goes through who's from a different culture, a different species, different race, different anything, right? And then understanding what their fears, motivations. It's scary, but it could have massive impact on us as a human. I mean, I'm not saying jacked in all the time, but it really could help. My favorite one is the last one, which is Homo solaris,
Hmm.
which is humans adapting for extraterrestrial environments. So,
Ah,
like if you're trying to go to, a Titan, or you're trying to go on a long-term, transferring your consciousness into the system, but built for like, a 100-year space travel. That's
wow.
that's possible,
Yeah.
right? That like
Yeah.
this stuff is not like so much science fiction anymore, although it is great science fiction. But when you think about it and you listen to me go through these, you're like, yeah, this could happen in the next 200 years. Doesn't have to be like the next 10 or 20, and that's what we're trying to explore, with, the Sinclairs, like they're seeing these things change, and the
Yeah.
rapidity of the change, is so much more so in that way. Yeah.
No, truly is fascinating. All right. I have one more question, and if there's anything else you want to bring up, I'd love to
Yeah,
hear it.
absolutely.
So this is something that I'm sort of grappling with. I grapple with it in my writings and other discussions with people and consultations, all those things. So I've been sort of a disciple of sort of Singularity University,
Mhm,
of Dr. Diamandis,
mhm,
since 2015-ish, and the exponential growth of technology and the abundance, all these amazing concepts and terminologies that, you talked about with people many years ago. They'd be like, you were insane. Now I think people are getting up to speed on this and they're starting to wrap their own heads around it and make sense. At the same time, I'm personally having a conflict where in my head, based on a lot of things that I've read, worked with, built, um, and some other like data scientists around specifically AI. And we're at a point where even what's his name? Jeffrey Hinton, so the godfather of AI, came out and he was at a conference I was at MIT. And he,
mhm.
before everyone, this was like 2.5 years ago, he said, I am deathly worried about where we're going with AI. There's no guardrails, there's no one controlling it. And then I've gone beyond that and said, well, we can't agree to in the environments globally with 170 countries around the world to agree to one way of trying to maintain whatever it is that we need to do to make sure that we don't have global warming past a certain point, whatever the case is, right?
Mhm.
If we can't agree upon that, how are we going to agree upon the guardrails for AI such that when we get to AGI and then beyond the super intelligence, that it isn't we're the monkeys now, and it's living more at a different pace, which it will anyways. But how do we
Mhm.
sort of better control that? And if we're able to control that, is there a way? I mean, are you concerned about where this could potentially go for humanity?
Yeah, I actually think there's, and this is a bit controversial, is I think there's better opportunities in the connection with us. As AGI becomes ASI, yeah, we could be looked at as the ant on under a boot. Yeah, absolutely. But understanding our humanity, will these machines have empathy? Will these machines have an understanding of hope, of dystopia, despair, just beyond the logic or the information that's been fed to them? When I worry about when people say, yeah, it's like we need somebody to, uh, you know, be that guardian. Well, who decides that? And what does that
Exactly.
guardian decide? Because
Right.
let's admit it. I mean, humanity, however you feel if aliens are here or not, we're kind of a backwater planet that's got tribal warfare. I mean, we're not like we've split the atom, but there's a lot to us that is still
True.
challenging.
True.
And I think by nature, um, are you going to be in a post-capitalistic society? And you talk about, Peter, I'm a Peter as well. And Peter's a whole approach, and he's been talking it way before a lot of people, is the idea of abundance. You have
Yes.
abundant energy, you have abundant resources, right? I think we'll get that through like mining the moon, mining asteroids. I think we're going to have a real access to materials and energy in the next 20 years. We're going to move into the commercial fusion era. We're going to do a lot because we have to. It's not just about, climate change and more coal or less coal. It is about a rethinking of how we interact with the planet. And I truly believe that once we get there, and look, the abundance thing has to exist and it's a thing to go, it's a thing to move toward. But I think us as humanity is moving forward, having AI, I don't know about guardrails because there's going to be we're witnessing oligopolies fight for dominance or market control. I think as long as there's some sort of like laws of robotics that are developed that are integrated into the code, but then somebody could always delete it, right?
Right.
I think we're going to have a constant, and it's funny in the book, Emma, who's the main protagonist, the mother, she is a AI ethics expert.
Oh, funny. That's great.
So she was going to like an ethics conference, and I think it was very relevant because it's like you're excited by the change and the evolution, but you're a little if you've seen The Terminator or my favorite film that motivated nobody really know is called like Colossus, the Foreman Project from the
Okay.
70s, like
Okay.
the like computers changing it. I think when you think about how do you, we have to collectively come together with I think a set of ethics and rules that we can implement and agree on that are in the system. I think that's the starting point, not a person, not a group. I think that's going to be the challenge. That was,
Oh,
that's my
it's
best, man. That's
no,
my
no, I
best one.
appreciate that. That's excellent. All right. Well, we have like 30 seconds left.
Yeah.
I certainly want to highlight, the book again, Super Shifts,
Yeah.
Transforming How We Live, Learn, and Work in the Age of Intelligence. Any final thoughts or words?
Yeah, I think if you're looking for a kind of an understanding of what you're experiencing right now, a positive look, there's so much dystopian things out there, a positive look as to the next, 200 years, a real actionable roadmap for the next 50, which is important, how to be positive, how to be proactive, how to have resilience. And we have actionable, not just like these things that are there, but we have a really well research framework with the spectrum foresight method, transform, as well as a futures operating system to you to actually like implement this. And yeah, we got I'll put some stuff for you in the links. People can get the first two chapters. You can get to meet the Sinclairs and get a little more familiar with the book. And we'd love for you all to check it out. So
Thank you so much. All right.
thank you.
Tech Snippets Today with Joseph Razinski.